She thought I'd always be there, cleaning up her mess, funding her lifestyle, letting her get away with everything. But what she didn't know. I was already one step ahead, and by the time she realized, it was too late. Before Elizabeth Carter became a name everyone in town recognized, before she ruled the tennis courts and effortlessly drew every eye in the room, our lives briefly crossed paths in ways neither of us could have predicted. I still remember the very first time I saw her, not in high school, not on a tennis court, but years earlier, on a sweltering August afternoon at the town's annual summer festival. We were just kids then, around 10 years old. I had just suffered a humiliating loss in the tug-of-war competition and was sulking near the lemonade stand when she sped past me, her blonde ponytail whipping behind her as she chased after her brothers, laughing. Even back then, she moved with the kind of confidence and speed that would later make her unstoppable. That same summer, my father took me along for my first visit to Carter Industries, where he had worked as a machinist since long before I was born. I didn't fully grasp what his job entailed, only that every evening, he came home smelling of metal and grease. As I wandered through the massive plant, captivated by the towering machines, I noticed a girl around my age standing near the front office, arms crossed as she argued with the receptionist. Even without knowing her name, I could tell she was used to getting what she wanted. Years passed before I saw her again, this time in middle school. By then, she had become the kind of girl everyone either admired or envied. I, on the other hand, was just another forgettable face in the background, too thin, too quiet, too unremarkable to be noticed. While she spent her days preparing for her next big match, I filled the margins of my notebooks with sketches of mechanical designs. By the time high school rolled around, the gap between us had only widened. We went to the same school, but I doubted she even knew I existed. Elizabeth had stepped into her confidence early, tall, athletic, and carrying an effortless charm that made her the center of attention wherever she went. I, however, remained small and wiry, still waiting for the growth spurt that never seemed to come. She embraced every opportunity to stand out, while I did my best to disappear behind loose-fitting jeans and oversized t-shirts. Each fall, the other girls eagerly anticipated Elizabeth's latest fashion choices, while no one ever gave mine a second thought. She had been a tennis prodigy since childhood, her height and power giving her an edge on the court. Gym class, for me, was a recurring nightmare where I was always the last one picked. But I found my escape in cross-country running, just me and the open road, no teams, no competition except the distance itself. Elizabeth's social life was a constant flurry of parties, dates with star athletes, and expensive outings with the town's wealthiest guys. Mine was non-existent. While she showed up to school each fall in a shiny new car, I rode the same battered bicycle I'd had for years. For all 4 years of high school, I rode the same worn-out bicycle. Thanks to our last names, Carter and Collins, we often ended up sitting next to each other in class. In those 4 years, Elizabeth spoke to me exactly once. She handed me a graded test with a curt, "Here." Her family owned Carter Industries, a company that employed over 160 people, including my father, a machinist. At graduation, she sat beside me, wearing a dress that was far more revealing than I was prepared for. I did my best to keep my composure, but she caught on, smirking at my obvious discomfort. After high school, I pursued a degree in process engineering. Occasionally, I'd see Elizabeth's name in the sports section. She'd earned a full-ride tennis scholarship, just as everyone had expected. College changed me. I shot up 5 inches, put on 50 pounds of muscle, and finally grew into my confidence. By junior year, I had made a name for myself, both academically and socially. During winter break, I found myself at a party, and Elizabeth was there. She was still breathtaking, but completely drunk. Her boyfriend of the week made some crude remark, and without hesitation, she slapped him across the face before storming off. With everyone else too wasted to care, she turned to me, the only sober one in the room, and demanded, "Take me home." The next morning, she woke up in my bed, immediately panicking. What the hell? "What are you doing here?" she blurted out. Before she could spiral, I cut in. "Relax. You were trashed. I stopped you from getting into a random taxi, cleaned you up after you threw up in my car, and made sure you didn't pass out in your own mess. Coffee and toast coming right up." As I walked to the kitchen, I caught her watching me in the mirror, a small, amused smile on her lips. I returned with breakfast, wearing an apron for modesty. She chuckled, eyeing the toast. "That's way too much jelly." Grinning, I replied, "You won't need a napkin. I never let grape jelly go to waste." Still smiling, I stepped back into the kitchen for another cup of coffee. When I returned, she was covered in grape jelly, a playful glint in her eyes. "Oh no," she said innocently. I barely had time to react before my phone buzzed, a reminder of my job interview that afternoon. The interviewer? Robert Carter, Elizabeth's father. The irony wasn't lost on me. The last time I had worn a suit was at high school graduation, so I had bought a new one for the occasion. No matter how my morning had started, I needed this job. Taking a deep breath, I walked into Carter Industries and greeted my cousin Sally, the receptionist. When I finally sat down across from Mr. Carter, I made my pitch. "I know I could take my degree to a bigger city, Chicago, Dallas, Houston, but that's not me. I want to stay here and work for you. I know I have to prove myself, and I'm willing to start at the bottom. My goal is to earn a summer internship, and if I perform well, a full-time position after graduation." Mr. Carter leaned back in his chair, studying me. "You graduated from the local high school, right? Did you know my daughter, Elizabeth?" I kept my expression neutral. "Oh, hell. Tread carefully." Swallowing, I replied, "Yes, sir. We had some classes together." Mr. Carter nodded, flipping through my proposal. "You actually ran the numbers on this?" "Yes, sir. I put together a full report." He smirked. "Haven't copyrighted it yet, have you?" I grinned. "Not yet." He chuckled, shaking his head. "All right, Jeff, let's talk numbers. How much is all this brainpower going to cost me this summer?" I straightened. "My approach is simple, sir, start me at minimum wage. If I prove my worth, I'll earn raises based on performance." He nodded approvingly. "I like that mindset. Fresh ideas like yours might be exactly what we need. Consider yourself hired as our first summer intern." Elizabeth spotted me the second I stepped onto the court. Flashing a smile, she waved me over, her confidence radiating even after an intense match. She greeted me with a quick kiss. "I love that you actually came to watch me play." Grinning, I teased, "You're burning a ton of energy out here. How about I take you to dinner so you can refuel?" She laughed, her eyes sparkling. "Sounds like a plan. Pick me up at 6:30. I'll be there." That evening, over pizza and beer at Lon's, the hours slipped away as we talked. All it took was a simple question, and Elizabeth opened up like she had known me forever. "I actually know a little about tennis," I admitted. "I've played, just, not at your level." She smirked. "Few do." I chuckled, then gestured to my outfit. "But the suit?" "I had an interview today, for a summer internship. If things go well, I'm hoping for a full-time job after graduation." She leaned in, intrigued. "How'd it go?" "Really well," I said, confidence returning. "I got the position. I start in June." Then came the one question I had hoped to avoid. "What company?" I hesitated. No way to sugarcoat it. "Carter Industries." Her smile faltered. "Wait, what? You had a meeting with my father?" I exhaled, preparing for impact. "Yeah. Too convenient, right?" She folded her arms, waiting. "Look, your name came up, but only in passing," I assured her. Her eyes narrowed. And? He asked if we were in the same class. I said yes, but that we didn't really hang out in the same circles. That's it. Elizabeth studied me carefully, weighing my words. I hesitated, then admitted, he also mentioned that he didn't remember me being one of the many guys who showed up at your house. She tilted her head, considering that. Then, slowly, her posture relaxed. You know, I actually appreciate that you told me up front. If my dad had. I expected her to say more, but she stopped. Her eyes shimmered with unshed tears as we parted that night. For weeks, we talked daily. Then, as schedules got busier, calls turned into emails. On Valentine's Day, we exchanged heartfelt cards, filled with affection, filled with promises to reunite soon. By June 1st, I officially began my internship at Carter Industries. From day one, I threw myself into the work, eager to learn everything I could about fabrication, product design, and factory operations. The workers welcomed me, and my enthusiasm didn't go unnoticed. Having my father as a department lead didn't hurt either, though I made sure to prove I belonged there on my own merit. One afternoon, as I was wrapping up for the day, Elizabeth appeared at the factory entrance, standing out like a misplaced socialite among the grease-stained machinery. She waved me over, a teasing smirk on her lips. I have dinner reservations at 6, she announced. I'll wait exactly 5 minutes. If you're not there by 6:05, I'm leaving. With that, she spun around, the hem of her dress swaying just enough to make my coworkers chuckle at our exchange. But I wasn't joking, I had a dinner date, and there was no way I was going to be late. By 5:45 p.m., I was parked outside the Carter estate. Through the peephole, Elizabeth saw me arrive but didn't immediately open the door. All right, if she wanted to play games, I'd play along. At exactly 5:55 p.m., I stepped inside, my confidence unwavering. Good evening, I said smoothly, I'm Mr. Jeffrey Collins, your escort for the evening. Elizabeth's father turned to greet me. Good to see you, Jeff. I nodded respectfully. Good evening, sir. Then I turned to her mother. It's a pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Carter. A sharp scoff escaped her lips. She eyed me critically, her distaste barely concealed. This is your guest. The janitor, she sneered. I expected better. I barely had time to react before Elizabeth, without missing a beat, responded with a casual, almost playful tone. Oh, don't worry, Mom. Jeffrey has very high standards. Then she added, without even looking my way, so high, in fact, that you probably shouldn't expect me home tonight. I nearly choked on air. Was she trying to provoke them? Or test me? Ignoring the tension, I switched gears. Speaking of standards, I said, leaning in slightly, I haven't heard from you in weeks. What's been going on? A knowing smirk crossed her lips. They say absence makes the heart grow fonder. Was that the answer you were hoping for? I shook my head, keeping my voice steady. I just know I missed you. Her gaze softened. I'm glad, Jeff. That means a lot. Later that night, at the steakhouse, I raised my glass. A toast, to your return, and to the fact that this town is instantly better with you in it. We clinked glasses, took a sip, and I leaned forward. So, how long have you been back? She exhaled, setting her drink down. Over the summer, she had been in Wisconsin, bouncing between tennis camps, coaching, babysitting, handling chores, and, of course, playing as much as possible. We had kept in touch through emails, calls, and the occasional handwritten letter. But as the weeks passed, the distance grew. By Christmas, we were barely speaking. She was lost in her world, and I was fully entrenched in mine. That summer at Carter Industries had given me an education no classroom ever could. That summer, I immersed myself in the world of precision parts manufacturing, learning the ins and outs of the industry from the ground up. Every day was a lesson in problem-solving, efficiency, and navigating factory politics. One of the biggest obstacles. Sam Carter. As the purchasing manager, his job was critical. Unfortunately, he either didn't care enough or simply wasn't cut out for it. Production delays were common, he frequently forgot to order materials or placed incorrect orders altogether. And when he did show up, he spent most of his time drinking coffee and daydreaming about his next fishing trip. John, one of the senior engineers, often defended him. "Elizabeth bullies him," he'd say. But the truth was, Sam lacked ambition. He had never married, kept to himself, and avoided responsibilities whenever possible. As I worked, I started spotting inefficiencies and proposing solutions. Over time, I gained a reputation for being sharp, resourceful, and driven. One connection led to another, and eventually, I met Craig, a well-connected attorney who had a habit of showing up to the shop floor just to chat. We weren't exactly close, but he introduced me to his former law school roommate, a patent specialist. By the end of the summer, I had filed 4 separate patent applications. Meanwhile, Elizabeth and I kept in touch, sporadically. Between her training, matches, and travel, tennis consumed her life just as engineering consumed mine. The only time we saw each other that year was for a single night at Christmas. Her family had taken a trip to Naples, Florida, cutting our time short, but for that one night, it felt like old times. "So, what's your plan after graduation?" Elizabeth asked, swirling the last of her wine. "For now. Staying with my parents," I admitted. "But not for long." She leaned back. "You should get a place of your own." Funny she should mention it. John had recently tipped me off about a foreclosed house the bank was eager to offload. Structurally sound, but in desperate need of renovation. "You could put some of that patent money toward a down payment," John had suggested. "The bank will cover the rest." The idea made sense. And just like that, I became a homeowner. As I settled into my new role at Carter Industries, my official title became Chief Engineer. The salary wasn't the highest among my peers, but the potential for long-term growth made up for it. Elizabeth, meanwhile, kept up her habit of showing up unannounced. Between tournaments, she'd breeze into town, we'd spend time together, and then, just as quickly, she'd disappear for weeks. One afternoon, while home for a brief visit, she arrived at my place with a suitcase full of laundry. She dumped the contents onto the floor, sorting through her clothes when, suddenly, a pack of condoms tumbled out. Silence. She blinked, then smirked. "Relax, those aren't yours. Or mine. They came free with my hotel stay." I raised an eyebrow. "Right. Totally normal amenity." Grinning, she tossed the pack onto the counter. "Consider it a gift." Ironically, Carter Industries would soon have first dibs on producing that exact brand. I was bringing in more business than the so-called marketing director, proving my value in ways that went far beyond my job title. By the time Elizabeth returned, my house was finally coming together, livable, comfortable, and ours in a way that felt real. But something about her was different. She wasn't her usual confident, untouchable self. Instead, she seemed restless, uneasy. She had suffered an injury while traveling, and since she was no longer covered under her father's medical insurance, she was stuck. Time off meant losing prize money, and going back to her parents' house wasn't an option she was eager to consider. Then, one evening, an idea took shape, one that, surprisingly, we both agreed on without a single word. Vegas. Eloping. We exchanged a glance, and that was it. It was the best decision we could have made. No big spectacle, no endless guest list, just us, choosing each other. And for a while, we were happier than ever. I focused on my career while Elizabeth continued to travel for tournaments. Whenever she came home, we had exactly what we needed from each other. She wasn't making much money, but she managed just fine thanks to her quarterly dividends from Carter Industries. One day, I joked, considering I'm the one making those dividends bigger, maybe you should share a little. She smirked but didn't answer. Then everything changed. A home pregnancy test. Positive. Another test. Same result. Elizabeth dropped into a chair, stunned. This can't be happening. I crouched beside her, trying to reassure her. It'll be okay. You were going to be off your feet for months anyway, this just gives you more time to recover. Eventually, she came to terms with it. She took a coaching job at a girls' school, and even though she couldn't play, she was an excellent teacher. Her students thrived under her guidance, and one team even won their state championship. The school also allowed her to use their facilities for rehab, and slowly, she regained her strength. When the baby arrived, my mother and grandmother were already there, eager to help. Elizabeth, on the other hand, had no maternal instincts. She was relieved to let them take over. My grandmother, well into her 70s, adored children and treated our son as if he were her own grandchild. Elizabeth, of course, saw this as having a free full-time nanny. Her focus remained on rehab and tennis. Within a year, she was fully recovered and back on the court. Once she was physically able, her schedule revolved around anything tennis-related, matches, tournaments, training. Meanwhile, she burned through her quarterly Carter Industries dividends like they were monopoly money. Since another check always arrived in a few months, she never saw a reason to save. She pushed for a private country club membership, separate from her parents, and went there daily for lunch, leaving the boys with whoever was available. Her spending and detachment from the family irritated me more than I let on. And by that time, I was starting to wonder how much longer I could pretend everything was fine. I had already taken a DNA test to confirm that the boys were mine. Not that it mattered much at this point, our once passionate marriage had eroded into a transactional partnership. At Carter Industries, John had finally taken over as president, but in reality, he wanted nothing to do with actual leadership. Instead, he offloaded nearly all responsibilities onto me, except for determining dividend payouts. My role was officially upgraded to operations manager, and when I asked John for a formal job description, he barely glanced up from his desk. "Just write it yourself," he said dismissively. That was exactly what I needed. With Craig's help, I drafted a job description that gave me extensive operational control, including full authority over equipment acquisitions, a key factor in keeping Carter Industries competitive. My spending limit was now high enough that I could modernize the company without waiting for board approval. Elizabeth, meanwhile, lived in denial. She still considered her quarterly dividends her personal fortune, failing to realize that Carter Industries was struggling. Stock values were slipping, and that meant her dividends would shrink. She was walking straight into a financial trap, one she had built herself. Her lawyer, in my opinion, was either sleeping with her or desperately wanted to. It was the only explanation for why he let her make reckless financial decisions without proper legal guidance. Then again, Elizabeth always thought she was the smartest person in the room. With our financial separation finalized, John soon found himself in his own crisis. "I need a loan," he admitted one evening, his voice thick with desperation. I leaned back. "How much?" "$1 million. I nodded slowly, already knowing exactly how to leverage this. "I can loan you $1 million, I said smoothly, "but I need your $6 million in company stock as collateral. You'd have to transfer your shares and voting rights to me." John hesitated. "Can I buy them back later?" "Of course," I said, keeping my tone casual. "For $1 million, within a year. No interest. But the deal is non-transferable. You can't sell them to anyone else." Too desperate to negotiate, John nodded. "Deal." After covering his debts and legal fees, he had just enough money left to move to Las Vegas, where he insisted he would become a professional poker player. It was a terrible plan. But not my problem. Sam, on the other hand, had a different kind of crisis. He just wanted to fish. No stress, no responsibilities, no people. That's when an idea struck me. What if you sold me your shares? I asked. Sam shook his head. I tried, but no one wants to buy 30% of the company, not with John and Elizabeth involved. They'd screw over any minority shareholder. And even if I sold, I'd have to figure out how to invest the money wisely to make it last. I leaned in slightly. What if you don't sell them outright? I suggested. Instead, I pay you a fixed amount every month for the rest of your life, and in return, you transfer ownership of your shares to me. Sam narrowed his eyes. Like a pension? Exactly. He considered it for a long moment before nodding. Now that, he said, I could live with. By September 1st, Elizabeth was in New York for the US Open, probably watching matches, but more likely entertaining herself with someone new. Meanwhile, I packed up the few personal belongings I cared about. I took what I was legally allowed from the mansion and moved back into my old house. By nightfall, the boys and I were settled in. They had stopped asking about their mother. She had been an inconsistent presence for so long that her absence hardly registered anymore. When my mother arrived the next morning, she took one look at the empty space Elizabeth had left behind inside, shaking her head. God, I've hated that woman since high school. Elizabeth returned from New York a few days later. She found my note within minutes, and my phone lit up with her furious calls. The moment I answered, she shrieked, "You owe me rent. How the hell am I supposed to make the mortgage payments without it?" I kept my voice even. Not my problem. Her tone turned venomous. If you don't bring me that check, I'll just raise my dividends to make up the difference. I'll have it taken straight from your salary. You're making a huge mistake, Jeff. I smirked. You should probably check your email. She hung up, and I knew exactly what would happen next. The board meeting notice she had ignored suddenly mattered. By the time she understood what had happened, it was already too late. Her eyes darted wildly across the room as she finally grasped the reality of the situation. Where are my brothers? You don't have power of attorney over them. I leaned back, keeping my expression relaxed. I don't need power of attorney. I slid a folder across the table. I bought their shares. Her face drained of color. Her lawyer snatched up the notarized transfer documents and board approvals, skimming through them before scoffing. This won't hold up. I crossed my arms. It already did. Elizabeth's breath hitched. She had lost. Her demeanor shifted instantly. Jeff, she said, her voice suddenly soft. Think about what's best for the children. I almost laughed. She had never factored the boys into her decisions before. But now that she was out of options, suddenly she was a concerned mother. I played along. I look forward to that conversation, I said smoothly. At 6:29 p.m., I rang the doorbell. Elizabeth opened the door wearing a silk dress that hugged her curves perfectly. Her makeup was flawless, her hair styled just right. She leaned against the doorframe, smiling coyly. Jeffrey, 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 she purred. You didn't need to ring the doorbell. This is your home. I stepped inside without a word. She had set the stage, soft lighting, a perfectly arranged dining table, a bottle of my favorite whiskey already opened. She tilted her head. I was just thinking about us. I met her gaze, unshaken. You should be thinking about something else. Her smile faltered. What do you mean? I exhaled slowly, savoring the moment. The board has voted to freeze your dividends for the next year. Her expression twisted in panic. You can't do that, Jeff. That's my only income. How am I supposed to live? I scoffed. You should have thought about that before. The charm vanished. Her voice sharpened, desperate. Jeff, I might have had a little fun with a few guys, but I was always loyal to you. Ask anyone in town. I laughed. I don't need to ask, Elizabeth. I already know. I laughed, shaking my head. Elizabeth, I said, my tone almost amused, for the past year, I've had a private investigator tracking you at every tournament. Her eyes widened. He gathered enough evidence, photos, videos, timestamps, to prove that statement is a complete lie. Elizabeth opened her mouth, but no words came out. I leaned in slightly, lowering my voice. Oh, sweetheart, I said with a smirk, I don't need your shares to run this company. My 70% gives me full control. You only hold 30%. Her lips parted slightly as realization dawned. Your stock is worthless to me. The color drained from her face as she fully grasped just how badly she had miscalculated. And let me be clear, I continued, my voice sharp and controlled. As long as you own those shares, there won't be a single dividend paid out. If I need extra income, I'll increase my salary. If the company does well, the employees will get bonuses before you see a single dime. Her hands clenched into tight fists. You can't do this, she whispered, but the panic in her voice betrayed her. I let out a slow breath, watching her unravel. Oh, but I can. She swallowed hard, struggling to regain composure. I'll fight you in court. I didn't flinch. My investigator has names, timestamps, and witnesses. My voice remained steady, unwavering. We can subpoena the men you've been with. They'll testify under oath. Your reputation. Completely destroyed. The whole town will finally see the real Elizabeth Carter. A choked sob escaped her lips. Her body trembled, her carefully constructed world collapsing around her. Her voice cracked. Why are you doing this, Jeff? I love you. I've loved you for years. Why? I exhaled slowly, meeting her gaze one last time. You slept with dozens of men after we got married. I let the words sink in. You disappeared for weeks, sometimes months. My jaw tightened. And the only time you ever came home, was when you needed something. Elizabeth shook her head, tears spilling down her cheeks. I can change, Jeff. Please, just give me another chance. I let out a humorless laugh. Another chance? She reached for my hand, but I pulled away. You don't get to say that now, Elizabeth. Not after everything. Her breath hitched. It wasn't supposed to be like this. No, I agreed, my voice low. It wasn't. She wiped at her face, trying to regain control. We can fix this. You and me. Just tell me what you want, and I'll do it. I studied her for a long moment, taking in the desperation in her eyes, the same eyes that had once held nothing but arrogance. What I wanted, I said finally, was a wife. A partner. A mother for our sons. But you? I shook my head. You wanted an escape. And when you got bored, you wanted me to clean up the mess. Her hands balled into fists, anger flickering behind the heartbreak. You're not innocent, Jeff. You let me come back every time. I smirked. Yeah, and that was my mistake. She opened her mouth, but I wasn't interested in hearing whatever excuse she had left. This conversation is over, Elizabeth. I turned to leave, but her voice cracked behind me. Jeff, please. I hesitated only long enough to give her one last truth. You asked me why I'm doing this. I met her gaze, letting the finality sink in. Because you already did it to yourself. And with that, I walked out the door, leaving her standing in the wreckage she had built. I stepped outside into the cool night air, inhaling deeply as I closed the door behind me. The weight of the past years, the betrayals, the lies, the endless cycles of leaving and returning, finally lifted from my shoulders. Elizabeth didn't chase after me. She knew it was over. For the first time in a long time, I felt free. The divorce was finalized within months. Elizabeth fought for everything: the house, more money, even partial control of Carter Industries. But she had no real leverage. Her financial recklessness had caught up with her, and without dividends or a steady income, she had no choice but to sell her remaining shares to stay afloat. And just like that, she was out. The company was finally mine. As for the boys, they adjusted better than I ever expected. They had always known, deep down, that their mother wasn't really present. Now, at least, there was no more disappointment. No more false promises. They had stability. They had me. And I had them. Years passed. Carter Industries thrived under my leadership, expanding beyond anything Elizabeth's father had ever imagined. I hired the right people, invested in the future, and turned a struggling operation into a powerhouse. Elizabeth? She drifted. Rumors reached me now and then, how she burned through what little she had left, how she bounced from one city to another, always searching for something she would never find. I never saw her again. And I never looked back. One evening, I stood outside watching my boys play in the yard, their laughter echoing through the air. This was the life I had built. Not the one I thought I wanted, but the one I needed. A life with real love. Real purpose. And finally, peace.